Welcome to the therapy room. A place where psychology becomes understanding, and understanding becomes healing. I'm a psychologist passionate about bringing psychology closer to people in a way that feels human, emotional, and deeply understandable. And tonight, we begin with one of the deepest and most painful questions of the human experience: why do so many people feel lost? Not physically lost. Emotionally lost. Spiritually lost. Psychologically disconnected from themselves. The kind of loss that follows you quietly through life. The kind where you wake up tired even after sleeping. The kind where you look around at your own routine and suddenly wonder how you ended up here. The kind where you continue functioning, smiling, talking, working, posting online, answering messages, pretending everything is fine, while internally feeling disconnected from your own existence. And perhaps no psychologist understood this feeling more profoundly than Carl Jung. Carl Jung believed that many people are not suffering because they are weak. They are suffering because they have become separated from themselves. Separated from meaning. Separated from authenticity. Separated from the deeper layers of their own psyche. Modern life teaches people how to perform, but not how to understand themselves. We learn how to impress others. How to compete. How to achieve. How to survive socially. But almost nobody teaches us how to sit quietly with our own mind. Almost nobody teaches us how to understand our fears, our unconscious patterns, our emotional wounds, or the hidden parts of ourselves that silently shape our lives. And because of this, many people slowly become strangers to themselves. Carl Jung believed every human being wears a psychological mask. He called this the persona. The persona is the version of yourself you show the world. The social self. The acceptable self. The professional self. The confident self. The composed self. The version of you designed for approval and survival. And there is nothing inherently wrong with the persona. We all need one. Society requires social roles. But the danger begins when the mask becomes stronger than the authentic self beneath it. This is where many people begin feeling emotionally lost without understanding why. They build lives that look successful from the outside while feeling emotionally disconnected on the inside. They become efficient but empty. Productive but spiritually exhausted. Socially accepted but internally fragmented. And eventually, something begins to crack. A strange emptiness appears. A subtle sadness. A quiet restlessness. A feeling that life somehow no longer feels alive. And this is where Jung becomes deeply important. Because Jung did not see these feelings merely as symptoms to eliminate. He saw them as messages from the psyche. Signals that something inside the person was demanding attention. Jung believed the human psyche naturally seeks wholeness. Authenticity. Integration. Meaning. And when we ignore our inner world for too long, psychological suffering begins to emerge. Not necessarily to destroy us. Sometimes, to wake us up. This changes everything. Because suddenly, feeling lost is no longer meaningless suffering. It becomes communication. A psychological signal. A call from the unconscious mind. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That sentence alone explains the lives of millions of people. Many individuals repeat the same painful emotional patterns over and over without understanding why. The same relationships. The same fears. The same insecurities. The same emotional triggers. The same self-sabotage. The same internal emptiness. Because unconscious wounds continue influencing conscious behavior. And this is why Jung believed self-awareness is one of the most transformative forces in human life. The more conscious you become, the less controlled you are by invisible psychological patterns. But becoming conscious is not comfortable. In fact, Jung believed real psychological growth is often painful. Because growth requires confronting the parts of ourselves we spend years avoiding. And this brings us to one of Jung's most famous concepts, the shadow. The shadow is the hidden part of yourself that you reject, suppress, or deny. The aspects of yourself that were judged, criticized, shamed, or emotionally abandoned throughout life. Your anger. Your insecurity. Your vulnerability. Your sadness. Your fear. Your forbidden desires. Your emotional wounds. Everything you learned was unacceptable. A child criticized for crying may grow into an adult disconnected from vulnerability. A child constantly rejected may grow into an adult obsessed with perfection. A person who learned that love depended on performance may spend their entire life performing for approval. But suppressed emotions do not disappear. They become unconscious. And according to Jung, whatever remains unconscious eventually begins controlling your life from the shadows. This is why some people appear successful externally while internally feeling emotionally exhausted. Because they spent years building a perfect persona while abandoning their authentic self. And the soul cannot survive forever inside performance. Eventually, the psyche begins demanding reconnection. This is often when people experience what Jung called a crisis of meaning. A deep emotional confusion where nothing feels fully satisfying anymore. Life becomes strangely empty. Motivation disappears. Relationships lose emotional depth. The person feels disconnected from purpose without understanding why. Modern culture often interprets this as failure. Jung saw it differently. He believed many psychological crises are actually the beginning of transformation. Because before becoming who you truly are, the false version of yourself often needs to begin collapsing. And that collapse feels terrifying. Many people mistake awakening for destruction because the process of becoming conscious can feel emotionally disorienting. Suddenly, the old identity no longer fits. Old habits no longer satisfy. Old goals no longer feel meaningful. The person feels lost because their soul no longer wants to continue living unconsciously. This is one of the deepest truths in Jungian psychology. Psychological suffering often appears when the psyche is trying to evolve. And perhaps this explains why so many people today feel emotionally exhausted. Modern society keeps people externally stimulated but internally disconnected. Constant information. Constant comparison. Constant noise. Constant distraction. But almost no silence. And silence is dangerous because silence forces confrontation with the self. This is why so many people fear being alone. Not because solitude itself is painful, but because silence removes distraction. And without distraction, unresolved emotions begin rising to the surface. Old fears. Old wounds. Old loneliness. Old insecurities. But Jung believed this confrontation is necessary. Because healing begins where avoidance ends. Many people spend their lives running from themselves. Running through productivity. Through social validation. Through work. Through entertainment. Through relationships. Through constant stimulation. But eventually, the unconscious mind catches up. And it often appears through anxiety, emotional numbness, depression, exhaustion, restlessness, emptiness, or the haunting feeling that something essential is missing from life. Jung believed that what we avoid internally eventually appears externally. And this is why self-understanding matters so deeply. Not superficial self-improvement. Not motivational performance. Real self-understanding. Understanding your fears. Your patterns. Your projections. Your wounds. Your desires. Your unconscious motivations. Because unconscious people repeat patterns automatically. Conscious people begin choosing differently. Jung called the lifelong process of becoming your authentic self individuation. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. It is the gradual integration of all parts of yourself. Your light and your darkness. Your strengths and vulnerabilities. Your conscious identity and your unconscious reality. Jung believed most people never fully complete this journey because authenticity requires courage. It requires losing illusions. It requires letting parts of your false identity die. And psychological death is terrifying. People cling to identities that no longer make them happy simply because those identities feel familiar. They stay in relationships that drain them. Careers that suffocate them. Lives that no longer reflect who they truly are. Because familiarity feels safer than transformation. But eventually, emotional exhaustion appears. And often, emotional exhaustion is not simply tiredness. It is misalignment. Misalignment between your external life and your internal truth. This is why some people feel profoundly empty even after achieving everything society told them would make them happy. Because external success cannot replace inner alignment. You can have status and still feel emotionally lost. You can have admiration and still feel disconnected from yourself. Jung understood this deeply. He believed modern individuals often suffer from spiritual emptiness disguised as psychological distress. This does not necessarily mean religion. It means meaning, connection, depth, authenticity, inner purpose. Human beings are not designed to survive emotionally on superficial stimulation alone. The psyche longs for meaning. And without meaning, life eventually feels hollow. This is why Jung became deeply interested in mythology, spirituality, dreams, symbolism, and archetypes. He believed the human psyche contains universal psychological patterns shared across humanity. The hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the child, the seeker. And perhaps one of the most universal archetypal experiences is the journey of getting lost before transformation. Almost every meaningful psychological rebirth begins in confusion, in darkness, in uncertainty, in emotional discomfort. And maybe this is where you are right now. Maybe your old identity no longer fits. Maybe your routines feel emotionally empty. Maybe you feel disconnected from yourself and cannot explain why. But Jung would likely tell you something important. Feeling lost is not always a sign that you are failing. Sometimes it is a sign that your soul no longer wants to live unconsciously. And while that awakening feels painful, it can also become transformative. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Think about how profound that really is. Most people spend years becoming who they think they should be. But very few people truly become themselves. Because authenticity requires confronting difficult truths. Truths about what hurts you, what you fear, what you avoid, what you secretly desire, what parts of yourself you abandon in order to feel accepted. And this is why Jung believed healing is not about becoming flawless. Healing is about becoming real. Many people want peace without self-confrontation. But Jung believed real transformation begins precisely where honesty begins. Honesty about your loneliness, your insecurities, your emotional pain, your unconscious patterns. Because rejected emotions do not disappear. They become symptoms. Anxiety, projection, emotional reactivity, self-sabotage, emotional numbness. Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we reject most strongly often become the very things that unconsciously control us. This is why shadow work is so important in Jungian psychology. Shadow work means becoming aware of the hidden aspects of yourself that you deny. Not to shame yourself, but to integrate yourself. Because the more fragmented the psyche becomes, the more emotionally lost the person feels. True healing requires wholeness. And wholeness requires compassion toward yourself. This is another powerful aspect of Jung's psychology, the idea that transformation does not happen through self-hatred. It happens through awareness. Awareness changes everything. The more conscious you become, the less controlled you are by unconscious emotional forces. And this changes relationships profoundly. Because unconscious people often project their hidden wounds onto others. They seek validation to fill emotional emptiness. They repeat emotional patterns automatically. They unconsciously recreate childhood dynamics inside adult relationships. But conscious people begin recognizing these patterns. And recognition creates freedom. This is why self-awareness can completely transform a life. Because once you begin understanding yourself deeply, you stop living entirely on autopilot. You begin noticing your fears, your emotional triggers, your coping mechanisms, your patterns of avoidance. And perhaps most importantly, you begin reconnecting with your authentic self. Jung believed that beneath all the masks and defenses exists a deeper center of the psyche. The true self. Not the persona. Not the social performance. The authentic core. And perhaps the reason so many people feel emotionally lost today is because they have become disconnected from that deeper self. They know their social identity but not their inner identity. They know their responsibilities but not their soul. They know how to survive socially but not how to understand themselves emotionally. And eventually, this disconnection creates emptiness. This is why Jung believed solitude can become psychologically transformative. Not because loneliness itself is beautiful, but because silence creates space for self-encounter. In silence, the unconscious begins speaking. This is often why periods of isolation become periods of profound transformation. Because without constant distraction, people finally begin confronting themselves. Their fears. Their grief. Their unresolved pain. Their hidden desires. And while this confrontation can feel uncomfortable, Jung believed it is necessary for growth. He once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That sentence may be one of the deepest truths in psychology. Real healing is not pretending negativity does not exist. Real healing is becoming conscious enough to face yourself honestly. Even the uncomfortable parts. Especially the uncomfortable parts. Because the parts of ourselves we avoid often contain the keys to transformation. And perhaps this is why emotional pain can sometimes become meaningful. Not because suffering itself is good, but because suffering can reveal hidden truths. Some people only begin truly living after emotional collapse. After heartbreak. After burnout. After loneliness. After profound confusion. Because those moments force introspection. And introspection changes people. Jung believed that the psyche naturally moves toward growth, even through suffering. Toward consciousness. Toward authenticity. Toward wholeness. And maybe tonight, this is what you need to hear. You are not broken because you feel lost. You are human. And perhaps your mind is not trying to destroy you. Perhaps your soul is trying to guide you back toward yourself. Back toward authenticity. Back toward meaning. Back toward wholeness. Back toward the parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. And maybe this feeling of being lost is not the end of your story. Maybe it is the beginning of becoming conscious. The beginning of becoming real. The beginning of finally meeting yourself. Thank you for being here in the therapy room. If this conversation resonated with something deep inside you, subscribe and join us for more explorations into psychology, healing, emotional growth, and the hidden world of the human mind. And remember, sometimes the people who feel the most lost are the ones closest to awakening.